The scream tore through the quiet of the village like a knife through cloth. Fatima dropped her clay pot by the well as the sound echoed, raw, cracked, final. She ran, bare feet slapping the dust, heart thudding against her ribs. Around the corner, an old man lay sprawled on the steps of the mosque, his white robe stained with blood from the corner of his mouth, eyes open but unseeing. Children stared in silence. A rooster crowed in the distance as if mocking the moment. From the crowd emerged two men in fine clothes, their faces pale. "It's him," one whispered. "After all these years." The other could only nod. No one noticed the crumpled paper in the old man's hand. Not yet. It would be read later. Too late. Wait. Fatima knelt beside him, trembling. "Who was he?" a boy asked. The imam whispered, "He used to be someone." That day, the village held its breath, because something deeper than death had arrived. A reckoning. And it would unravel everything. Fatima hadn't seen him before. Not clearly. Just glimpses. A figure wrapped in faded white, who sat in the mosque's outer courtyard for days without speaking. He'd been there during the call to prayer, during the market rush, during the rains. Always alone. No one approached him. Some said he was a beggar, others called him a madman. But Fatima had watched him. His hands were always clean. His posture straight, even when sitting in dust. There was something regal about his silence, like he was guarding something. Or waiting. She remembered how he would trace the air gently with one finger, as if writing a name that only he could see. Once she'd brought him bread. He didn't speak. He only placed his hand on her head for a moment, eyes filled with something too heavy to name. That memory stabbed her now. Because she'd walked away that day, and never returned. And now he was dead. The village whispered. They always did. Stories bloomed fast where facts withered. Some said he had once been rich. Others, that he had killed a man and fled. One elder claimed he was once a prince, forced into exile by betrayal. A traitor swore he recognized him from a town far north, where a woman wept at a grave every morning. But no one knew for certain. Not even the imam. What they knew was this. He had never begged. He had never spoken. And he had never looked anyone in the eye, except once. With the mayor's son. Just a glance, but it left the young man shaking. "He looked through me," he had said, as if he knew what I did. That look haunted the boy who stopped drinking, stopped laughing, and stopped sleeping. Now, as the village gathered around the old man's body, that boy stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking, whispering to himself, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." As dusk approached, the old man's body was moved inside the mosque. The imam covered him gently, reverently, like dressing a wound. Fatima followed, numbed. Inside, the scent of old stone and rosewater hung in the air. Candles flickered. A hush held the space, not from fear, but from knowing. As if the walls remembered who he was, even if the people didn't. Fatima sat beside the covered body, her fingers brushing the floor. "You knew him, didn't you?" the imam asked. She nodded slowly. "Not his name, but yes." He sighed. "Names lie, but actions don't." The letter lay nearby, unopened, sealed in age. The imam placed it in Fatima's hands. "When the time is right." She didn't ask what it said. She feared it. Some truths rot in silence, and others once spoken never stop echoing. That night, dreams pulled Fatima under like a river. She saw the old man standing tall in a place that was not the village, a palace perhaps, or a courtroom. He wore robes of deep blue, a sword at his side, a crown in his hand. People bowed to him. Then it shifted. Flames. Screams. A child crying out behind a locked door. His face twisted in agony as he backed away, the crown falling from his hands. The dream splintered. A woman's voice whispered, "He chose silence over war." Fatima jolted awake, sweat pouring down her face. The letter lay beside her, untouched. She reached for it, then stopped. Outside, a dog howled. Wind scratched at the windows. Her hands trembled. She didn't know what scared her more, what the letter might say, or what it wouldn't. The morning after the old man's death, Fatima returned to the mosque. She hadn't slept. The letter burned in her pocket, yet still she hadn't opened it. The imam greeted her with tired eyes. "People are asking questions," he said. "They want to know who he was." Fatima stared at the floor. "So do I." In the courtyard, a group of villagers had gathered, whispering louder now. Accusations floated in the air. Why had no one helped him? Why did he come here to die? He had no name, one woman spat. "Only secrets." A man retorted. Or maybe he had too many names. Fatima turned from them. The old man's death had left something festering. Guilt, fear, truth clawing at the edges of memory. "Let them talk," the imam said. "Truth doesn't need their approval. It needs a voice." Fatima's fingers brushed the letter again. The paper felt heavier today, as if it had waited long enough. She finally opened it. Alone beneath the ancient olive tree outside the village. Her hands trembled as the seal cracked. The ink had faded, but the words still bled with power. "To the one who finds me, I was not born to be silent, but silence saved lives." It wasn't a letter. It was a confession. He spoke of a betrayal 2 decades ago, a bribe accepted, a village burned, a brother dead. "I watched men cheer my exile, then forget me, but I never forgot them." Fatima's breath caught. The names he wrote were still living here. Leaders, elders, her neighbors. "I returned not to accuse. I came to see if they remembered what they buried. Most didn't." The last line read, "If someone still listens, let them remember me as I was before silence." Her hands dropped to her lap. She felt as though she'd just read a grave someone had tried to hide. Fatima wandered back into the village with the letter clutched tightly. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, she watched. She saw the bakers flinch when she passed. The mayor's son avoided her gaze. The shopkeeper, always cheerful, grew quiet. It was like the village had conspired to forget him, and her presence now was unearthing something dangerous. That night, she returned to the mosque. The imam read the letter in silence. When he finished, he closed his eyes, lips pressed tight. "He named them," Fatima said. "And he forgave them." The imam nodded. "That's the part they won't understand." "Then what do we do?" she asked. He folded the letter again. "We remind them, not with blame, with truth." She looked up at the stars through the open roof. "Truth hurts," the imam whispered. "So does rot. That doesn't mean we let it spread." The next morning, the imam stood before the gathered villagers. Fatima stood beside him, the letter in her hands. People grumbled, eyes narrowed. "We buried a man yesterday," the imam began, "but we did not bury what he carried." He motioned to Fatima. She unfolded the letter. Her voice shook at first, but she read every word. The confessions, the forgiveness, the pain. As she read, the air shifted. Some turned away. Others began to weep silently. The mayor's son dropped to his knees. The baker left, and one old woman covered her face and sobbed like a child. When Fatima finished, silence held the square. "He remembered all of you," she said. "Even after you forgot him." The imam stepped forward. "You cannot undo what was done, but you can decide who you become now." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, heads began to bow. Later, Fatima sat alone beneath the same olive tree, the letter beside her. The village was quiet. Different. She didn't know if they would change, or if they merely felt exposed. But something had shifted. A boy approached, the mayor's son. He didn't speak, just sat beside her. After a long pause he whispered, "He saved me, didn't he?" Fatima looked at him. He tried. The boy nodded slowly. I used to see him watching me. I thought it was hatred. Now I think it was hope. They sat in silence for a long time. Then gently, the boy picked up the letter. What should we do with this? Fatima smiled faintly. We keep it, not to shame them, to remind them. He nodded again, tears in his eyes. Maybe that's how we begin. A breeze rustled the tree. The village exhaled. And somewhere beyond the hills, the past finally settled. Word of the letter spread beyond the village within days. Visitors came, strangers from neighboring towns, drawn by whispers of a man who had once been someone. Some came in reverence, others in curiosity, and a few with fear. A scholar arrived, carrying a weathered journal. He was my teacher, he told Fatima. He taught us truth matters more than praise. His voice trembled as he flipped through the pages. He vanished after the fire. They said he betrayed us, but I never believed it. Fatima listened, absorbing the fragments. Each visitor brought a piece of him, an act of kindness, a quiet warning, a shield raised in silence. The old man had walked alone, but he'd left ripples and lives scattered across the land. Why did he come back here? The scholar asked. Fatima looked toward the mosque. Because this is where he was forgotten. And now, slowly, he was being remembered. That night, the mayor's son walked alone to the ruins at the edge of the village, a place no one visited. The land was charred and silent. This was where the fire had happened. 2 decades ago, homes had burned, and a child had died. The village rebuilt, but this place remained untouched, cursed by silence. He stood at the edge, hands shaking. I was there, he whispered into the wind. I watched, I said nothing. His voice broke. I let them blame him. He dropped to his knees. The ground smelled of ash even now. He saved me that day, told me to run, and I let him burn. Tears carved lines down his cheeks. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small stone, engraved with a name. He placed it in the soil. Forgive me. And for the first time in 20 years, the wind carried something other than silence. In the village, conversations changed. Where once there was gossip, now there was confession. Old wounds surfaced. A woman admitted she had lied to protect her brother. A shopkeeper confessed to hiding the truth out of fear. The imam held circles at the mosque, where stories were shared and truths laid bare. Fatima watched quietly. She saw how truth did not destroy them, it softened them. The ones who had stayed silent were no longer running. They were remembering. One morning, the old woman who once spat at the mention of the stranger came to Fatima, holding a torn photograph. He was my cousin, she said, voice trembling. I hated him for leaving. But he didn't leave, did he? We pushed him out. Fatima held her as she wept. In the ashes of betrayal, something else had begun to grow. Not absolution, not yet. But maybe, atonement. Days later, Fatima returned to the olive tree, this time not alone. A group followed. The imam, the mayor's son, villagers once hardened now softened by memory. They came to build a marker. No grave, for there was no body buried here. But a place nonetheless. A carved stone set into the earth bearing no name, just the words. He remembered when we forgot. Around it, they planted a circle of olive saplings. One by one, people placed tokens at the stone's base, a prayer bead, a letter fragment, a child's drawing. Fatima placed the old man's letter last. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. The imam said a prayer, not for the dead, but for the living. As they finished, no one spoke. They simply stood together in shared silence. Not mourning. Remembering. That evening, Fatima sat outside her home, watching children play in the distance. Their laughter echoed off the walls that once held silence. She thought of the old man, how he chose to carry pain rather than pass it on. That was his revenge. Not fire. Not blame. Just quiet, enduring truth. the kind that waits patiently until it's seen. She turned as the mayor's son approached, holding the scholar's journal. He wrote about justice, he said, sitting beside her. But not the kind we hand down. The kind we live up to. Fatima nodded. Then we have work to do. He smiled faintly. For once I'm not afraid of that. They sat under the stars as the village settled around them. The past had not vanished, but it no longer ruled. And in the stillness, a seed of something else began to grow, honor born not from glory, but from truth remembered. A week passed. The village was quieter, not from fear, but reflection. Then came the stranger. He arrived at dawn, riding a thin mare, his face veiled by dust and time. No one recognized him, except the imam, who froze mid-prayer. "Kareem," the imam whispered. The man dismounted slowly. "I heard he died." Fatima stepped forward. "You knew him?" Kareem nodded. "He was my brother." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "They said you were dead too," someone muttered. "No," Kareem said, "I lived, but I didn't speak." His eyes scanned the mosque, then the olive tree in the distance. "I chose silence, like him, but mine was shame, not sacrifice." Fatima stepped closer. "He waited for you." Kareem's voice cracked. "He shouldn't have." And then his knees gave way, not from age, but from the weight of what could no longer be undone. They brought Kareem to the mosque, where he sat alone beside the space where his brother had once rested. The letter was placed before him. He didn't open it. He only rested his hand upon it, head bowed. "He carried the burden for both of us," Kareem said. The imam sat across from him. "Why didn't you come back?" Kareem whispered, "Because I was the one who accepted the bribe. He took the blame to protect me." The words echoed off the stone. Fatima stepped back, breath caught in her throat. "He never named you," the imam said. "Even in his last words." Kareem shook his head. "I waited for the truth to die with him, but he chose a different death." The imam placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then perhaps you still have time to live differently." Kareem nodded once, a tear falling. "If they'll let me." The silence that followed wasn't rejection. It was reckoning. The next day Kareem stood in the village square, flanked by the imam and Fatima. The villagers gathered again, uncertain, cautious. Kareem looked older under the morning sun, exposed. "I am the reason you lost him," he said. "I accepted gold." He paid with silence. Murmurs rose. A man stepped forward. "And now you expect forgiveness?" Kareem didn't flinch. "No, I expect memory. Of who he was, of what I became." A long pause followed. Then the woman with the torn photograph walked up. "He saved this village from itself. And now, you come to save your own soul." She handed him the photo. "He would given it to you." He waited. Kareem held it to his chest. "Then I won't run anymore." The villagers didn't speak. But no one turned away. And in that, forgiveness had begun, not as a gift, but as a shared burden. Later that evening, Fatima walked with Kareem through the olive grove. He stopped at the memorial stone, falling to his knees. "I never said thank you," he whispered. "You covered my shame with your silence. You let them hate you so they wouldn't hate me." Fatima knelt beside him. "He didn't do it to protect you from punishment. He did it to protect your soul." Kareem laughed bitterly. "Then I failed him twice." "No," Fatima said softly. "You came back." He stared at the inscription. He remembered when we forgot. "Will they ever truly forgive me?" he asked. She looked at the saplings swaying in the dusk breeze. "They might. But first, forgive yourself." The sky darkened, and as the first star appeared, Kareem placed the photograph at the stone's base. "Then let this be where I begin again." That night, Fatima lit a single candle in the mosque and sat in silence. The village had changed. Not healed, but awakened. Truth had cracked through layers of time, like roots breaking stone. The mosque felt different now, less like a building and more like a witness. She heard footsteps. Karim entered, carrying the scholar's journal. "May I leave this here?" he asked. She nodded. He placed it near the letter. "It's time his words became part of our prayers." The candle's flame flickered. "Do you think he would have wanted that?" Fatima asked. Karim exhaled. "He wanted peace, not for himself, for us." As he turned to leave, Fatima whispered, "Then maybe now he has it." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, an olive branch bent under its own growth. Inside the mosque, 2 candles burned side by side. Karim stayed. Days turned into weeks. He helped rebuild the eastern wall of the mosque, cleaned the graveyard no one had tended in years, and began teaching the children what his brother once taught in silence. But he never raised his voice. "A man doesn't teach by shouting," he told them. "He teaches by remembering." Fatima watched his transformation with cautious hope. There were still those who avoided him. One night a child whispered, "Mama says you were a bad man." Karim smiled softly. "She's not wrong." The boy hesitated. "But you fixed the fountain." Karim laughed gently. "Sometimes we do wrong things. Then we try to do right things. That's how we stay human." The boy nodded and offered him a fig. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, Karim felt something loosen inside. Not forgiveness, but permission to keep trying. One afternoon, as Fatima passed the olive grove, she saw the saplings thriving. The stone still stood silent, but someone had added a carving beside it. A single word in delicate script, "Witness." She turned to find the mayor's son nearby, chiseling gently into a slab of wood. "We're building a bench," he said. "People keep coming here to sit." Fatima smiled. "Then let them sit in truth." He looked at her, eyes no longer haunted. "Do you think this changes things?" She nodded. "Not everything, but maybe enough." Behind them, 2 young girls tied prayer beads onto one of the trees. They didn't know the story. Not fully. But they knew it mattered. That was enough. Memory, like trees, grows quietly, but its roots go deep. And this place, once scarred by silence, was beginning to speak again. The letter was finally read aloud during prayer. The mosque was full. Men, women, even children sat in reverent quiet. The imam read every word, slowly, letting each syllable settle like dust after a storm. "He chose silence over vengeance," he read. "He gave you time to find your conscience." There were no gasps, no protests, just listening. Some wept openly. Some stared at the floor, lips pressed tight. When he finished, the imam closed the letter and whispered, "Now it belongs to all of us." The letter was placed in the mosque's library, not behind glass, not locked away. Just there, among the other voices of faith and fallibility. Fatima lingered after everyone had gone. She touched the page once more. "You gave them the truth," she said softly. "Now they must decide what to do with it." The silence in the mosque was no longer empty. It felt full. Weeks later, a caravan passed through the village. Merchants, musicians, scribes. One storyteller, hearing whispers of the man and the letter, asked to hear the tale. The villagers gathered at dusk, and Karim stepped forward. He told the story, not as confession, but as history. He named no one, but he named the truth. The crowd listened in silence, eyes wide, hearts heavy. When he finished, the storyteller bowed low. "This is no tale," he said. "It is a mirror." Karim offered him a copy of the letter. "Then carry it. Let others look into it." As the caravan moved on, songs echoed through the hills, songs that carried more than rhythm. They carried memory. Truth had moved beyond the village now, and the man who had once been erased had become something else entirely. A story that refused to be silenced. That night, as stars spilled across the sky, Fatima sat beneath the olive tree once more. She lit a single candle beside the stone. She wasn't mourning. She was remembering. Remembering a man who said nothing, yet spoke volumes. remembering a village that buried truth, then unearthed it with trembling hands. She closed her eyes and let the wind tell the story back to her in pieces. A scream. A letter. A name left unspoken. A silence that shielded rather than wounded. Then, footsteps approached. Karim. He sat beside her without a word. Together, they watched the candle flicker. He forgave me, Karim finally whispered. And I never deserved it. Fatima replied, none of us did. That's why it mattered. The flame danced in the breeze but never went out. And in its glow, the past stayed present. Quiet. Gone. But no longer hidden. Time passed, but the memory did not fade. The olive saplings grew taller, their branches reaching like arms toward the sky. Villagers began visiting the grove not in silence but in reflection. Children asked questions. Elders answered gently. The story was now part of them, not as shame, but as teaching. Karim walked the grove each morning, clearing weeds, trimming branches. One child followed him every day. Why do you care for trees? He asked. Karim smiled. Because truth is like them. If you forget it, it dies. The boy looked around. But what if someone cuts them down? Karim placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we plant again. The child nodded, serious. I'll help. In that promise, Karim saw the future his brother had hoped for. One not built on silence, but on seeds of truth. The mosque's library began to grow. The letter had become a catalyst. Villagers brought their own writings. Apologies, reflections, memories. Pages filled with things long unsaid. The imam sorted them into quiet stacks. We were always told history was for the powerful, he told Fatima. But this is people remembering themselves. Fatima had begun writing too. Not stories of others, but of herself. Her father's silence, her mother's sorrow. The way she had once walked past the old man without a word. Why do we write what hurts? She asked the imam. He answered, because pain untold becomes poison, but when written, it can become healing. She placed her pages on the shelf beside the letter. They were not eloquent, but they were honest. And now, they were part of something larger than regret, something sacred. That afternoon, the village held a gathering, not to mourn, but to remember. They shared stories, sang psalms, recited verses not from scripture, but from life. No one led. No one performed. They simply remembered. The baker spoke of the old man's kindness in winter. A widow shared how he once carried her water in silence. Even those who once denied knowing him, now admitted their fear had stolen their voice. Karim stood quietly, listening. He did not speak. He didn't need to. This was not his story anymore. It belonged to them all. As the sun set, Fatima rose. We once buried a man, but in truth, we buried our shame. Today, we dig it back up. Not to suffer, but to grow. There was no applause. Just quiet nods. And in that quiet, something bloomed. Later that evening, Karim walked alone to the outskirts where the ruins still stood. They had never rebuilt here. But something drew him back. He sat among the blackened stones, listening to the wind. He pulled a small journal from his coat, the same one his brother once carried. Opening it, he added a final page. Today, they remembered you. He paused, then added, and tomorrow, I will speak of you again. Closing it gently, he placed it in a metal box and buried it beneath the scorched earth. Not to hide it, but to root it. So that even here, in this place of ashes, truth could take root. He whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness but for strength. Let this ground grow what I once destroyed. The stars blinked above, silent witnesses to his vow. In the final days of spring, the olive tree, the first one planted, bloomed for the first time. Tiny white blossoms dotted its branches, fragile but defiant. The village gathered again, not to mourn or confess, but simply to see. Fatima touched one of the blooms gently, her eyes welling. "He would have smiled," she said. Karim stood nearby, hands folded, quiet. The children ran between trees, laughing. Elders watched, some holding hands, some wiping their eyes. The imam whispered, "This is what justice looks like. Not punishment, but blooming where once there was only fire." No monument was built that day. No speeches were given. Just a shared breath, a quiet awe. And as the sun warmed the grove, the blossoms held on. Delicate. Strong. True. 1. Years passed. The olive grove became a place of pilgrimage, not for worship, but remembrance. Travelers came with stories of their own, carrying burdens too heavy to hold alone. And here, under the trees born from silence, they were unburdened. Fatima had grown older, her hair streaked with silver, but her voice steadier than ever. She greeted each visitor with warmth and a simple question: "What truth are you carrying?" Some answered. Some wept. Some just sat. The grove didn't ask for names. It asked for honesty. One morning Fatima found a letter tucked beneath the stone. "He taught me to speak again." It was unsigned. But it didn't need to be. Truth had no signature, only resonance. And as she held the letter, she smiled. The old man was still speaking. Not in sermons. In echoes. Karim aged quietly. He rarely spoke of the past now, not because he had forgotten, but because he had lived long enough to let it transform him. The village no longer looked at him with suspicion. They saw him as part of the soil that had changed them. One day, a group of young men asked him to speak to their children. "Tell them about the man in the letter," they said. Karim sat beneath the olive tree and simply said, "He taught us what not to do, and how to make it right when we did it anyway." He looked around at the listening faces. He didn't die a hero, he died a reminder. A girl raised her hand. A reminder of what? Karim paused. That silence can either be a shield or a sword. The difference is what you use it to protect. And with that, the lesson began. The imam, now with a cane and slower step, returned one final time to the grove. He placed a new journal on the stone and whispered, "For the ones who still haven't spoken." He turned to Fatima. "You'll carry this now." She nodded, the weight of it not heavy in her hands, but in her heart. "How will I know what to write?" she asked. He smiled. "Write what you fear. Write what you hope. That's where truth lives." Then he walked away slowly, the breeze carrying his robes like fading memories. Fatima looked down at the empty journal. The pages waited, white, wide, honest. For her. For the village. For anyone brave enough to fill them. And just like that, the story continued, not as an ending, but as invitation. That evening, the village lit lanterns and placed them along the path to the grove. One by one, families walked the trail, no procession, just presence. No one spoke loudly. No one led. It wasn't a ceremony. It was memory. A collective step into what they had once denied. Fatima walked last, carrying the journal against her chest. As she approached the stone, she placed it in a carved niche beneath it. One lantern was placed beside it, and soon dozens surrounded it, soft glows flickering like stars fallen to earth. From the youngest child to the oldest widow, they stood together, not to mourn a man who died, but to honor a man who dared to remain. In the silence, the wind shifted, carrying warmth. The tree above them shook gently, and no one moved. It felt like breath, like blessing. As dawn broke, the village stirred slowly. Birds sang. Leaves whispered. The world, for a moment, felt forgiven. Fatima stood outside her home, watching children run past, their laughter easy, their eyes unburdened. She placed a hand over her heart, where the memory lived. The old man had been a stranger. Then, a mystery. Then, a lesson. And now, he was a part of them. Not in myth, but in marrow. A child's voice called out, "Why do we remember him, if we never knew him?" Fatima replied without turning, "Because he remembered us. even when we forgot ourselves. The child didn't ask again. Some truths don't need repeating, just living. The wind lifted her scarf slightly. She smiled. And in the hush that followed, the story closed, not with silence, but with understanding.